Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we go beyond just glancing at the news.
Way beyond.
We really dig into the stories shaping our world, looking for those hidden currents, those surprising connections.
Exactly.
Today, we're going to explore how decisions, sometimes made far from view, maybe deep in the ocean or, in the halls of power, how they create these ripples that, well, they end up affecting all of us. I'm your guide, ready to unpack the stories behind the headlines. We've pulled together quite a stack of sources just for you, our listener, because we know you want more than just the surface level.
And our mission? Yeah, it's always the same, to really extract the most important bits, those nuggets of knowledge and insight.
Yeah.
We want to give you that shortcut, help you feel genuinely well-informed without getting totally buried in information.
It's overwhelming out there.
It really is. We know you're curious, you want that thorough understanding, but you're also busy. So the goal isn't just telling you what happened. It's about getting why it matters, how it all connects. We're here to synthesize, to analyze, and hopefully spark a few of those aha moments for you.
Love those aha moments. Okay, let's unpack this. First story. Speaking of sparks, let's dive right into something that's, well, it's literally changing right before our eyes. It's fascinating, but also, frankly, a bit of a warning sign about our planet. We're heading over to the United Kingdom. The seas there are telling a very, very interesting story.
They certainly are. And it's quite concerning. News outlets like the BBC, for instance, they've been reporting on a really significant environmental shift, something that needs our attention.
What is it?
Basically, the United Kingdom seas, the waters surrounding the UK, have just experienced their warmest first 7 months ever recorded.
Wow. The warmest 7 months.
On record, yeah. And this isn't just, a weird weather blip. It's a critical data point for climate observation.
So it shows a trend.
Exactly. A sustained, worrying trend, not just some fleeting anomaly. It tells us something fundamental is changing in the marine environment there.
And one of the consequences mentioned is the emergence of, and I quote, extraordinary new species in UK waters. Here's where it gets really interesting. My mind immediately jumps to, weird sea monsters or something totally unknown. Slight chuckle.
Yeah.
But what's the reality? What are scientists actually seeing?
Slight chuckle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy to let the imagination run wild, but the scientific significance here is really profound.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the warmest first 7 months on record, what does that actually mean? It signifies a sustained period where ocean temperatures are significantly higher than the long-term average.
Right, not just a hot week.
Not at all. Months on end. Like a clear signal of underlying warming trends. And these records, they're not just guesswork. They are meticulously kept.
How do they do that? Keep track?
Well, it involves a massive global effort.
Yeah.
Meteorological agencies, oceanographic institutions, they use a huge network of data sources. Think ocean buoys bobbing out there, sophisticated satellites constantly scanning the sea surface temperature, and even data collected from ships crossing the oceans.
So lots of different inputs.
Well, loads of them. And the reliability comes from the sheer volume of that data, the consistency over time, and the cross-checking between different methods. It allows scientists to spot these long-term climate trends and anomalies with a very high degree of confidence.
Okay.
So again, this isn't just one unusually warm summer day. It's months and months of significantly elevated temperatures across a really wide area. It's like the ocean has a persistent low-grade fever.
That's a good analogy. A fever that's changing the whole environment for marine life.
Precisely. It fundamentally alters the conditions they live in.
So if the ocean's running a fever, what are the biological consequences? You mentioned these extraordinary new species. Are we talking about finding brand new creatures? Like things unknown to science?
That's a really important point to clarify. Usually when reports mention extraordinary new species in this context, they're not talking about species entirely new to science itself.
Okay, so not aliens from the deep. Chuckle.
Chuckle. Probably not, no. It generally means species that are new to United Kingdom waters. Species that haven't typically been found that far north before.
Okay, so they're moving.
Exactly. The scientific term for this is often range shift or species migration. As the ocean temperatures climb, marine life, and this can be everything from different types of fish to crustaceans like crabs, even down to the microscopic plankton that form the very base of the food web, they start to extend their geographical range.
Where do they go?
Generally, they move toward the poles, seeking out cooler waters. They're essentially looking for those Goldilocks conditions, not too hot, not too cold, the conditions they need for survival, for feeding, for reproduction.
Conditions they maybe can't find anymore in their traditional habitats because they've become too warm.
That's exactly it. Their old neighborhoods are getting too hot, so they're packing their bags, metaphorically speaking, and moving north.
So it's less about discovering fantastical creatures and more like watching existing species redraw the map of where they live because of climate change.
That's a very good way to put it.
What specific kinds of species are we seeing making this move into UK waters? Are we talking like tropical fish suddenly appearing off the coast of Scotland?
Well, maybe not parrotfish off Scotland just yet, but certainly species that were traditionally found in warmer, more southerly waters of the Atlantic are becoming much more common further north.
Like what? Can you give some examples?
Sure, we're seeing things like red mullet, various species of sea bream becoming more established. Even certain types of southern crab species are pushing further north than they used to.
Interesting.
And it's not just the bigger stuff. It also includes smaller organisms like certain types of zooplankton or phytoplankton. These tiny organisms are absolutely crucial. They underpin the entire marine food web, so their movement has knock-on effects.
Okay, but here's the potential downside, right? What happens when these new arrivals meet the existing residents of UK waters? Is it always a peaceful coexistence?
That's the critical question, and often the answer is no, it's not peaceful. This is where the ecological impact gets really complex and potentially damaging.
How so?
Well, think about it. Could these migrating species become invasive in their new home? Will they start competing aggressively with the native species for essential resources, things like food sources or suitable habitats to live and breed in?
So they could start pushing out the locals.
Potentially, yes. They might outcompete them. Or another major concern is whether these newcomers could introduce new diseases or parasites.
Oh, right. Diseases the native populations have never encountered before and have no immunity to.
Exactly. That could lead to widespread die-offs among native fish stocks or other marine life. It throws the existing ecosystem completely out of balance.
That's where it stops sounding like an interesting nature documentary and starts sounding like a serious ecological problem. Introducing new players into such a delicate, interconnected system. I mean, we know from examples on land how devastating invasive species can be.
Precisely. Marine ecosystems are incredibly complex. You have these intricate food webs, these delicate interdependencies between species that have evolved together over thousands, even millions of years.
A balance.
A very fine balance. So, when new competitors or new predators arrive, they can put immense pressure on the native species. This can lead to population declines, sometimes even local extinctions of native species, or you might see shifts in which species become dominant in a particular area.
Can you give an example of how that might cascade?
Sure. Imagine a new fish species arrives, and it eats huge amounts of a specific type of smaller fish or invertebrate. Now, if a native predator, maybe a seabird or a larger fish, relied heavily on that same food source.
Its food source is suddenly depleted.
Exactly. And that impact can cascade right up the food chain, affecting larger fish, marine mammals, seabirds, everything that depended, directly or indirectly, on that original prey item. It can also change the overall health, the productivity, and the resilience of the entire ecosystem.
Making it weaker, less able to cope with other problems.
Yes, making it less robust against other environmental stressors like pollution or further temperature changes.
So, this warming in UK waters and the arrival of new species, this isn't just some quirky, isolated thing happening around Britain, is it? This has to be part of a much bigger picture.
Absolutely. It's a textbook example, a very vivid, real-time illustration of the much broader global issue of ocean warming and its widespread impact on marine biodiversity all on the planet.
We've seen this elsewhere, haven't we?
Oh, yes. For years. Think about the devastating coral bleaching events we've witnessed in places like the Great Barrier Reef in Australia or across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. That's directly linked to rising sea temperatures killing the algae that corals depend on.
A massive loss of habitat and biodiversity.
Huge. And we're also seeing significant changes in the migration patterns of commercially important fish stocks like cod or tuna in the Atlantic and Pacific. This directly impacts global fisheries, the economies of coastal communities, and the livelihoods of millions of people.
Right.
You see, the oceans act as the planet's great heat sponge. They absorb an enormous amount of the excess heat generated by our greenhouse gas emissions.
Doing us a favor, in a way.
In a way, yes. But they can only absorb so much before the consequences become severe and very visible, like these warming seas and shifting species we're seeing in the UK and elsewhere. The system is clearly under stress.
Okay, so let's connect this back to you, our listener. Why should someone listening, maybe hundreds or thousands of miles from the UK coast, why should you care about the temperature of the seas there?
Because these marine ecosystems are profoundly interconnected across the entire globe. They don't respect national borders.
How so? What's the connection?
Well, the oceans play a massive role in regulating global weather patterns. Think about ocean currents like the Gulf Stream, which affects weather across Europe and North America.
Yeah.
Warming oceans can alter these currents.
Okay, so weather impacts.
Definitely. They also produce a huge proportion of the oxygen we breathe through phytoplankton photosynthesis. And of course, they are a vital source of food protein for billions of people worldwide.
Right. Fisheries depend on healthy oceans.
Absolutely. So what's happening in the UK seas isn't just some regional curiosity for marine biologists or British fishermen. It's a very clear, alarming signal of larger planetary shifts. Shifts that affect everyone, eventually.
Through things like our weather, the air we breathe, the food on our plates.
Exactly. It's a global ripple effect. These changes signal stress on a system that is vital for the very habitability of our planet. It matters to all of us.
A critical point indeed. The health of our oceans really is tied to the health of the planet and ultimately to our own well-being.
Inextricably linked.
Okay, from the deep blue of our oceans, let's shift gears. We're moving to the digital frontier now, a topic sitting right at that busy intersection of, well, cutting-edge technology, global finance, and inevitably international relations. We're talking about the absolute backbone of artificial intelligence. We're talking about microchips.
And this really does raise an important question. How do governments, especially major powers, strategize to maintain a technological edge in a world that's changing so incredibly fast?
Especially when the tech has potential military uses, too.
Precisely. Dual-use technology. And our sources, including reports from outlets like the New York Times, they're pointing to a really significant development here.
What's happening?
The United States government has apparently reached an agreement where it will receive a 15% cut of the revenue from Nvidia and AMD's sales of their most advanced artificial intelligence AI chips to China.
Wow, 15%. A cut of the sales.
A 15% cut, yes. This is a pretty substantial move, and it's expected to directly impact the revenues, the bottom line, of these two huge American tech giants, Nvidia and AMD, who are major exporters of these high-end chips to the Chinese market.
And there's an actual agreement in place for this payment to the U.S. government.
Apparently so. The sources indicate an agreement is formally in place.
A 15% cut. That's quite a chunk of change. It almost makes the U.S. government sound like a silent partner in these massive tech deals.
Slight chuckle. An assertive silent partner, perhaps?
Yeah, a very assertive one. It's almost like they're saying, that's a nice super advanced AI chip you've got there. Be a shame if, you couldn't sell it to one of your biggest markets. Else, of course, we get a piece of the action. Chuckle. Well, it certainly highlights how the lines are blurring, aren't they? Between government oversight, national security concerns, and corporate operations, especially in these strategically critical sectors.
So what does this mean economically for Nvidia and AMD? That 15% has got to hurt.
Oh, it's definitely substantial. These companies operate on absolutely massive scales. We're talking billions in revenue from these kinds of chips. So even a single percentage point difference matters a lot. A 15% cut could easily translate into hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars in reduced revenue.
Ouch.
Yeah. And that could certainly affect their bottom line. It might impact how much they can reinvest in crucial research and development, which is the lifeblood of this industry.
They need to stay ahead constantly. And it will force them to reevaluate their global market strategies, especially regarding China, which has been, up to now, a huge and growing market for these advanced chips.
So do they just tack that 15% onto the price tag for the buyers in China, or do they have to absorb it themselves, hitting their own profit margins? And who exactly are these buyers, these consumers in China, needing such high-end chips?
That's the million-dollar question for the companies, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or rather, the billion-dollar question. They could try to pass on the cost, but the market is fiercely competitive.
And China wants these chips badly.
Desperately, for their own massive tech ambitions. So it's more likely that Nvidia and AMD will have to absorb a significant portion of that 15% cut themselves, which will directly impact their profitability.
Okay, and the buyers, who needs these things?
The primary buyers in China are the big Chinese tech companies, Think Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, also leading research institutions, and possibly government-backed entities as well.
What do they use them for?
They need these incredibly powerful chips, specifically the high-performance graphics processing units, or GPUs, for a whole range of things, powering massive data centers, running cloud computing infrastructure, and crucially, training the most advanced artificial intelligence models.
AI models for what?
Everything. Applications ranging from developing autonomous vehicles, advanced robotics, sophisticated natural language processing, like the large language models we hear so much about medical research, scientific simulation, and yes, potentially national defense and surveillance systems too.
So these chips are basically the engines driving modern AI development.
Quite literally, they are the essential hardware foundation.
Which brings us right to the heart of the geopolitical strategy here, doesn't it? This isn't just about money or corporate profits or even just market share. This feels much bigger.
It absolutely is. It's profoundly about power, about strategic advantage on the global stage. This action looks like a very clear, very deliberate move in the ongoing technological rivalry between the U.S. and China.
Aimed at slowing China down.
Fundamentally, yes. It seems to be about national security and maintaining a technological edge for the United States. The primary objective, from the U.S. perspective, is likely twofold.
What are the two parts?
First, it's probably aimed at preventing, or at least significantly slowing down, China's progress in developing its military AI capabilities. Think about things like advanced surveillance systems, autonomous weapons, sophisticated cyber warfare tools.
Okay, military applications.
That's one major concern. Second, it's about maintaining U.S. technological supremacy in this absolutely critical field of artificial intelligence. AI is increasingly seen as the next great frontier of global economic and military power. Whoever leads in AI could have a decisive advantage.
And this 15% cut, it's a novel way to approach it, isn't it? Not quite a ban, but something else.
It really is.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that this 15% cut isn't just about generating revenue for the U.S. government, though that's part of it. It functions almost like an unprecedented strategic tax on a rival's technological advancement. It's not an outright ban on selling the chips, which might trigger a much more immediate and potentially drastic response, like a complete decoupling. Instead, it's this constant levy, a direct transfer of economic value from the entities buying the chips in China through the U.S. companies to the U.S. government.
Almost like extracting a tariff on China's future AI capabilities.
That's a great way to think about it. It forces China to constantly weigh the cost. Is it worth paying this premium to get the most advanced chips from the U.S.? Or should they double down on developing their own domestic alternatives, which are likely less powerful or efficient, at least for now?
So it creates a sustained pressure point rather than just one big shock.
Exactly. It's a more calibrated chokehold, perhaps, designed to slow things down and make acquiring the leading edge more expensive for China.
So this policy fits neatly into that broader strategy we hear about called technological decoupling, trying to untangle the U.S. and Chinese tech sectors.
Yes, it fits perfectly within that framework. Technological decoupling is all about reducing that deep interdependence between the two economies in critical technology areas, primarily for national security and economic resilience reasons.
And AI chips are about as critical as it gets right now.
Absolutely fundamental.
Yep.
So this policy works by limiting China's easy, unfettered access to the most advanced chips needed for cutting-edge AI. The U.S. seems to be trying to create, or at least tighten, a choke point in the global supply chain.
Forcing China's hand, in a way.
Forcing them to either slow down their AI development or invest even more massive resources into developing their own indigenous chip-making capabilities, which, as we know, is incredibly difficult, expensive, and takes a very long time.
But what if China does succeed? What if this move just pushes them to accelerate their own domestic chip production even faster? Couldn't that backfire on the U.S. in the long run?
That is absolutely a distinct possibility, and it's arguably one of the biggest risks of this entire strategy for the United States. It could very well incentivize China to pour even more resources, more state funding, more engineering talent into becoming self-sufficient in advanced semiconductor manufacturing.
Creating their own independent ecosystem.
Exactly, which could lead down the road to what people call a bifurcated global tech ecosystem. You might have one sphere dominated by U.S. and allied technology standards and supply chains, and another sphere centered around Chinese technology.
What would that mean, practically?
It could have huge implications. Issues with interoperability between systems, potentially slower overall global innovation because efforts are duplicated or not shared, and maybe even impacts on the future cost and availability of technology for everyone around the world. It's a very high-stakes gamble.
A gamble on both sides, really. And what about the impact on innovation within companies like Nvidia and AMD? If you cut off or restrict access to a massive market like China, with its huge demand, does that stifle their ability to innovate because they have less revenue for R&D?
That's the classic double-edged sword argument, isn't it?
Seems like it.
On one hand, yes, significantly reduced revenue from a major market could theoretically slow down the pace of research and development for these specific companies. R&D in cutting-edge semiconductors is astronomically expensive.
So less money could mean slower progress.
It could, but on the other hand, adversity sometimes breeds innovation, right? It could also spur these U.S. companies to innovate in new directions, maybe develop even more advanced, specialized chips for other markets where they don't face these restrictions. Or perhaps find creative ways to innovate around the restrictions, focusing on different chip architectures or entirely new applications.
And for China.
Similarly, for China, these restrictions, while painful in the short term, might force their engineers and scientists to find highly creative, alternative solutions. It could foster a unique, indigenous approach to AI development, even if it starts off potentially slower. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say.
Okay, so this is clearly a policy with significant debate around it. We're talking about a major government intervention in what many see as a free market. How do different political perspectives in the U.S. view this? Let's start with, say, a more left-leaning viewpoint.
Well, from a more left-leaning perspective, you'd likely hear significant criticism about this kind of overt government intervention in the free market. The arguments might center on several points.
Such as?
Such as creating economic inefficiencies, potentially distorting global trade relationships, and maybe even harming American companies in the long run by limiting their access to lucrative markets and potentially putting them at a disadvantage compared to international competitors who don't face these restrictions.
So concerns about economic impact and maybe fairness to U.S. companies.
Yes, and often there's also an emphasis from this perspective on the importance of international cooperation, particularly in science and technology. The argument would be that these kinds of restrictions could actually stifle the overall pace of global AI progress by fragmenting research efforts and hindering collaboration, plus concerns about broader impacts on global economic stability.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, how would a more right-leaning perspective likely frame this action? What's the counter-argument?
From a right-leaning viewpoint, this action would probably be framed very differently. It would likely be seen as a necessary, even crucial and strong measure taken to protect vital national security interests.
Security first?
Security first, absolutely. The emphasis would be squarely on the imperative to maintain America's competitive edge against a strategic rival, which is how China is often viewed from this perspective, especially when it involves foundational technologies like AI chips, which clearly have potential military and surveillance applications.
So the risk is too high to ignore.
That would be the argument. This perspective often highlights the importance of protecting American intellectual property and preventing the transfer of sensitive technology that could potentially be used against U.S. interests or its allies. They would likely see these restrictions not as market interference, but as a prudent, proactive step in a long-term strategic competition.
And the economic consequences.
The argument would likely be that national security concerns must take precedence over purely economic gains in such critical areas. They might also point to China's own history of protectionist policies or alleged intellectual property theft as justification for the U.S. taking reciprocal defensive measures.
Fascinating. Two very different lenses to view the same action, economic protectionism versus national security imperative. It really underscores the difficulty in regulating something as abstract yet powerful as artificial intelligence.
It certainly does.
And for you, the listener, this isn't just some far-off geopolitical chess match about tiny bits of silicon. This is a fundamental struggle for control over the very infrastructure of our digital future.
That's right.
Think about how AI is already weaving itself into the fabric of our lives. From the algorithms shaping your news feed, to advancements in medical diagnosis, to managing logistics for global trade, to, yes, the future of national defense.
It's everywhere and growing.
Exactly. So the decisions being made right now about who controls access to these foundational AI chips,
Hmm.
they will significantly influence not just who leads in AI development, but also potentially what values get embedded into the AI systems that will increasingly govern aspects of our lives. It affects every industry, every future innovation, and ultimately every single one of us.
A truly profound point.
Hmm.
The foundational technology shapes not just future capabilities, but the ethical landscape as well.
Okay, let's shift our focus now. We have to turn to a much graver topic, one that really highlights the dangers, but also the absolute critical importance of journalism, especially in conflict zones.
Hmm.
We're looking again at the ongoing crisis in the Middle East, specifically focusing on events in Gaza.
Yes, this is an incredibly difficult and sensitive situation. Our sources, and these include reports from international news organizations like Al Jazeera and Reuters, they paint a tragic picture on the ground.
What's the latest development?
There was an Israeli attack in Gaza recently, which resulted in the devastating death of Anas al-Sharif and 4 other journalists who were working for Al Jazeera.
5 journalists killed in one incident.
Yes. And according to the reports, the attack occurred at a location described as a tent designated for the press, which was situated outside the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City, a major urban area within the Gaza Strip.
A tent marked for the press.
That's what the sources indicate. And this incident, as you can imagine, has sparked widespread outrage internationally and raised very serious concerns again about press freedom and the fundamental safety of journalists trying to operate in conflict zones.
But then, almost immediately, we see the emergence of a conflicting narrative, which seems to happen so often in these incredibly charged situations.
It does.
Israel has claimed that one of the Al Jazeera journalists killed in this strike was, in their words, a Hamas leader.
Yes, that claim was made. And it just adds another incredibly painful and complex layer to an already tragic event, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. How do you even process that?
Well, this is exactly where, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the role of independent journalism becomes so unbelievably critical and also so fraught with danger.
Why is it so critical?
Because the fundamental importance of having journalists on the ground providing information from war zones simply cannot be overstated. They are often the only independent eyes and ears witnessing events, trying to deliver verifiable information, trying to tell the human stories amidst the chaos to the global public.
And they're supposed to be protected, aren't they?
They are. Under international humanitarian law, we're talking about the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols. Journalists, particularly when they are clearly identified as press, are granted protected civilian status.
Meaning they shouldn't be targeted?
Exactly. They must not be deliberately targeted in armed conflict unless, and this is the crucial caveat, unless they are taking a direct part in the hostilities. This protection is specifically designed to ensure the free flow of information.
Which is vital for?
It's vital for public accountability, for enabling informed public discourse around the world, and for documenting potential war crimes or human rights abuses. The United Nations has also passed numerous resolutions reinforcing the need to protect journalists in conflict zones.
But then you have this situation. Al Jazeera says these were journalists working in a marked press area. Israel says one of them was a Hamas leader. How does anyone, especially the media reporting on this, navigate such starkly conflicting narratives from the parties involved in the conflict?
It's incredibly difficult. It really represents a core challenge of reporting during active conflict, often referred to as information warfare.
The battle over the story.
Precisely. The immediate sharp controversy surrounding Israel's claim versus Al Jazeera's reporting, it just throws into sharp relief the immense challenges of verifying information in a war zone. Both sides have their own perspectives, often their own evidence, or at least claims of evidence, and almost always their own strategic interest in shaping the narrative that reaches the international community.
So what can we, as news consumers, do?
It really necessitates a cautious, critical, and impartial approach from us as consumers of news. We have to try and consider all the available viewpoints, weigh the credibility of the sources, look for corroboration, but resist the urge to jump to conclusions or immediately take a side based on limited or contented information.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Much easier said than done. And it underscores the vital need for independent, impartial investigations into incidents like these. Though tragically, conducting such investigations effectively and impartially in the midst of ongoing hostilities is often difficult, if not completely impossible.
Which is why press freedom groups always call for them.
Exactly. Organizations like Reporters Without Borders, the Committee to Protect Journalists, they consistently push for thorough, independent probes whenever journalists are killed or harmed in conflict.
So what is the immediate impact of an incident like this on the ground for the journalists still trying to work there? If colleagues are killed or if there are claims blurring the line between journalist and combatant, surely that makes it incredibly dangerous to continue reporting.
It absolutely does. Incidents like this have a profound chilling effect on independent journalism.
How so?
When journalists are killed, or even when there's a credible accusation, regardless of its ultimate truth, that blurs the lines between the press and combatants, it significantly increases the perceived and actual risks for media organizations and for the individual reporters on the ground.
So fewer reporters might go in or they might pull back.
Precisely. It can lead to a drastic reduction in on-the-ground reporting, especially from the most dangerous areas. This creates critical information vacuums for the outside world. It makes it much harder to gather direct evidence of what's happening, to independently verify claims made by the warring parties, and to provide that comprehensive, nuanced picture that's essential for understanding the human cost and the strategic developments of the conflict.
And the outrage mentioned in the sources, where does that come from?
That outrage stems directly from these concerns. It's expressed globally by international press freedom organizations, by human rights groups, often by other governments, by the UN. They're all deeply concerned about the erosion of protections for journalists and the grave implications this has for accountability, human rights, and adherence to international law. It truly is a constant, exhausting battle for truth and narrative control in these conflicts.
Resigned sigh. It sounds utterly exhausting and incredibly dangerous, and that battle for narrative, it extends beyond specific incidents to the broader strategic landscape of the conflict itself, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Which brings us to another major development being highlighted in the news. Newspapers are covering Israel's defense of its ongoing plan to, quote, take control of Gaza City.
Gaza City being a key urban center in the Gaza Strip.
Exactly. And this is being reported alongside widespread coverage of what international bodies and aid groups are increasingly calling the calamity unfolding in Gaza, the humanitarian situation.
What's fascinating here is that stark juxtaposition, isn't it? The declared military objective versus the reported humanitarian reality on the ground. Let's break down the military side first. When Israel talks about taking control of Gaza City, what does that actually mean in military terms? Is this a full occupation, a clearing operation, something else?
That phrase, taking control of a major urban center like Gaza City, can actually encompass a range of military objective and operational strategies. It's not always one single thing.
What are the possibilities?
It could mean a full-scale, long-term occupation, which would involve maintaining a significant troop presence and potentially establishing a new administrative structure, essentially governing the city.
Okay, occupation is one possibility.
Another possibility is that it refers more to a large-scale clearing operation. The aim there would be to neutralize specific military threats, say Hamas command centers alleged to be in the city, tunnel networks, rocket launching sites, and then potentially withdrawing troops after those specific objectives are met.
So go in, neutralize targets, get out.
Possibly. Or it could involve establishing temporary control points, security zones, buffer areas, designed primarily to deny access to adversaries and control movement within the city, without necessarily implying full governance.
And from Israel's perspective, what's the stated rationale for wanting to control Gaza City?
From Israel's perspective, the strategic rationale typically stated would be to dismantle Hamas's remaining military capabilities and its political infrastructure, which they argue is heavily concentrated in Gaza City. They would likely aim to eliminate command centers, which they often claim are deliberately embedded within or beneath civilian infrastructure like hospitals or schools, and to secure areas that have been used in the past to launch rocket attacks into Israeli territory.
But urban warfare is notoriously difficult and dangerous, right? Especially for civilians.
Incredibly so. History is replete with examples. Fighting in densely populated urban environments is one of the most complex and dangerous forms of warfare, almost invariably leading to significant civilian casualties and widespread destruction, even when efforts are made to minimize harm.
Which brings us to that other term being used, calamity. When international bodies use a word like calamity to describe the humanitarian situation in Gaza, what does that imply? It sounds truly catastrophic.
It absolutely does. The term calamity, as it's being widely reported by UN agencies, the Red Cross Red Crescent, numerous international aid organizations. It implies human suffering on a massive, almost unprecedented scale in this context.
Can you elaborate on what that encompasses?
It encompasses several horrific interconnected realities. First, tragically, increased civilian casualties resulting from the ongoing military operations hitting densely populated urban areas.
Yeah.
Second, widespread displacement of the civilian population. Many people have been forced to flee their homes, often multiple times, leading to massive overcrowding in temporary shelters, schools, or even out in the open, with inadequate sanitation or protection.
And the infrastructure.
That's the third aspect.
Yeah.
The systematic destruction of critical civilian infrastructure. We're talking about homes, hospitals being damaged or destroyed, schools, vital water and sanitation systems being rendered inoperable, power grids collapsing.
Which makes delivering aid almost impossible.
Extremely challenging and often insufficient. Humanitarian aid delivery faces enormous obstacles, security risks, logistical nightmares, insufficient supplies getting through. This exacerbates severe food insecurity, leads to a dire lack of essential medical supplies, and creates conditions ripe for the rapid outbreak and spread of infectious diseases.
So organizations like the UN and Doctors Without Borders are using terms like calamity to signal this level of crisis.
Yes, they've repeatedly used similar stark language to describe the dire situation, emphasizing the urgent, desperate need for sustained humanitarian access, better protection for civilians caught in the fighting, and ideally a cessation of hostilities to allow aid to reach those in need.
Okay, looking beyond the immediate fighting, if Israel were to achieve its goal of taking control of Gaza City, what happens next? Who governs Gaza? That seems like the incredibly complex long-term question here.
It is perhaps the most complex and critical question hanging over this conflict. And honestly, there are no easy answers, no widely agreed upon solutions on the table right now.
What are the possibilities being discussed, even if they're difficult?
Well, the questions surrounding the future governance of Gaza are incredibly intricate, fraught with deep political divisions and immense security challenges. Various theoretical proposals have been floated over time.
Like what?
One idea is a potential return to control by the Palestinian Authority, which currently governs parts of the West Bank. But that would likely require significant reform and strengthening of the PA, and raises questions about its legitimacy and capacity in Gaza after years of Hamas rule.
What else?
Another scenario sometimes mentioned is the establishment of some kind of multinational peacekeeping force, perhaps with Arab state participation, to maintain security and oversee aid distribution, at least temporarily. Or maybe an interim international administration, perhaps overseen by the UN or a coalition of willing nations.
Or does Israel maintain some kind of long-term security control?
That's another possibility, the one that carries immense burdens and risks for Israel itself, potentially resembling a long-term occupation, which many Israelis are wary of. Each and every one of these scenarios comes loaded with its own huge set of challenges.
Challenges like legitimacy, funding, getting everyone to agree.
Exactly. Issues of legitimacy in the eyes of the Gazan population, the practical capacity to govern effectively, the willingness of regional and international players to actually participate, commit troops, provide substantial long-term funding. It's a minefield. The question of post-conflict governance is arguably just as critical, if not more so, than the military operation itself in determining the long-term stability or instability of the region.
And thinking regionally, what are the potential ripple effects of Israel's actions in Gaza, particularly this move towards controlling Gaza City on the broader Middle East? How does this play out for regional stability?
The potential ripple effects are immense and deeply concerning to policymakers across the globe. Actions taken in Gaza can trigger very strong reactions from neighboring countries, think Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, all of whom share borders or have significant stakes in the outcome.
And beyond governments.
Beyond governments, it can impact powerful non-state actors like Hezbollah in Lebanon or various militia groups across the region. It can also inflame tensions and public opinion within societies throughout the Middle East and the wider Muslim world, potentially leading to widespread protests, increased political polarization, and tragically sometimes empowering extremist groups who exploit the conflict for their own ends.
International bodies are watching closely too, I assume.
Constantly. International bodies like the United Nations Security Council, the International Criminal Court, ICC, the International Court of Justice, ICJ, they're all closely monitoring the situation, particularly regarding compliance with international humanitarian law. The developments have direct implications for international relations, questions of accountability, and the overall geopolitical landscape, affecting alliances, trade routes, energy markets, and ongoing diplomatic efforts across the entire region.
It's clear this isn't just about headlines from a distant conflict. It's about the lives of millions of people. And it forces us to confront these incredibly complex moral and strategic dilemmas that nations and the international community grapple with. Understanding these dynamics, even without easy answers, helps you, our listener, to critically assess global events and perhaps form your own perspective on what constitutes justice, security, and stability in such a difficult world.
A very difficult but absolutely necessary understanding to strive for.
Okay, let's shift focus again, moving from international conflict now to some significant domestic challenges within the United States. We're going to look at a pressing urban issue and a particularly controversial proposed solution that's been making headlines.
Right. What's fascinating here is how we see this convergence of really complex social issues, the intricacies of urban governance, and the exercise of executive power. And this is playing out specifically in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States.
What's the story?
Our sources, including reports from outlets like the BBC, indicate that Donald Trump, who, just for clarity for our listeners, is the current president of the United States as of today, August 8th, 2025.
Right. Context is important.
Indeed. President Trump has made a very public demand that people experiencing homelessness in Washington, D.C. must, in his words, immediately move out of the city.
Immediately move out. The entire homeless population.
That's the reported demand. And according to the sources, this demand is being justified by citing concerns about crime and control within the nation's capital.
Crime and control.
Yes. And the situation is further complicated because there's reportedly a federal takeover threat looming over D.C.'s local government. This suggests that further executive action by the president could be imminent. The reports say the nation's capital is essentially waiting for Trump's next steps.
Wow. And this has obviously stirred things up.
Unsurprisingly, yes. These orders or demands have sparked considerable debate and attention from various news sources across the political spectrum.
Immediately move out. Slight chuckle. I mean, just the word immediately. It almost sounds like demanding a hurricane immediately stop, doesn't it? As if homelessness is just a matter of people deciding to pack up and leave, or that it's a simple problem with an instant fix, rather than a deeply entrenched, complex social crisis.
Slight chuckle.
Yeah.
It does highlight, doesn't it, either a fundamental misunderstanding or perhaps a deliberate oversimplification of homelessness as an incredibly multifaceted social issue.
It's not simple.
Not at all. The root causes are deep, complex, and interconnected. You've got a severe nationwide lack of affordable housing across the U.S. You have pervasive mental health challenges, often going unaddressed due to insufficient access to care, widespread substance abuse issues, frequently linked to trauma, poverty, and despair, and underlying systemic economic hardships, job loss, stagnant wages that don't cover basic living costs, crippling medical debt. The list goes on.
So just ordering people to move out doesn't solve any of that.
Not remotely. A simple move-out order isn't a practical solution, nor is it a humanitarian one. It primarily just displaces vulnerable people. It might push them into neighboring jurisdictions or force them into even more hidden, unsafe situations. It doesn't address the underlying systemic reasons why they became homeless in the first place.
It just moves the visible problem, perhaps.
Exactly. It contrasts very sharply with evidence-based strategies that have shown promise, like the Housing First approach, which prioritizes getting people into stable housing first and then providing wraparound support services to address health, addiction, or employment issues.
And Washington, D.C. itself. It's not just any American city, is it? Its relationship with the federal government is unique, which makes a presidential directive like this even more potent, potentially.
That's absolutely right. D.C. has this unique status. It's a federal district, not a state. This goes back to the founding of the capital. And because of that historical arrangement, the U.S. Congress, and by extension, the president, through executive actions, retains significant oversight authority over D.C.'s local governance. Much more authority than they have over any state government.
So this federal takeover threat isn't just rhetoric, it's legally possible.
In theory, yes, it's legally possible for the federal government to exert much more direct control over D.C. than it could over, say, Chicago or Los Angeles. A federal takeover of certain functions isn't entirely unprecedented in its legal possibility, although imposing it on day-to-day municipal operations against the will of the local government would be highly unusual, extremely controversial, and likely face immediate legal challenges.
What could a takeover even look like?
It could potentially entail the federal government assuming direct control over key city functions, maybe local policing. D.C. already has multiple federal police forces, but this could affect the Metropolitan Police Department, social services, the city's budget allocation, even zoning and land use planning, essentially bypassing the city's elected mayor and council.
Which would have huge implications for local democracy there.
Profound implications for local autonomy, for how services are delivered to residents, and for the democratic rights of D.C. residents, who, it's always worth remembering, already lack full voting representation in Congress despite paying federal taxes.
Now, the president's demand explicitly linked homelessness to concerns about crime and control. Is there solid evidence backing up a direct link between visible homelessness and a significant increase in serious crime in cities, or is that framing more of a political tool?
That's a really crucial question, and it's one that's often debated and, frankly, often politicized. The reality is complex. While it's true that visible homelessness, especially large encampments, can sometimes be correlated with an increase in certain types of crime, often petty theft, public order violations, things related to survival or untreated addiction or mental health issues in those specific concentrated areas. The data generally does not support a direct causal link between the state of being homeless itself and a significant, measurable rise in serious violent crime across an entire city.
So the connection isn't as straightforward as sometimes presented.
Not usually, no. Often the perceived link is more about public perception, fear of the unfamiliar or the visibly poor, and sometimes the deliberate politicization of complex social issues to justify certain policy responses.
Like emphasizing enforcement over social services.
Exactly. Framing homelessness primarily as a problem of crime and control tends to lend support to punitive measures like sweeps or move-along orders and enforcement-led solutions, rather than prioritizing investments in affordable housing, mental health care, addiction treatment, and job support, the things that actually address the root causes. Alternative approaches focusing on those root causes, community policing, and robust social services are generally shown by research to be more effective in the long run at reducing both homelessness and crime.
Okay, what about the legal side? Could a directive like immediately move out or a forced federal takeover face legal challenges? Can a president just order people to leave a city?
Oh, undoubtedly. Such a directive, especially one as broad and immediate as move out, would almost certainly face immediate and significant legal challenges in federal court.
On what grounds?
Several constitutional grounds would likely be invoked. Civil liberties protections, particularly the right to freedom of movement, the right to be free from arbitrary detention or seizure, which forcible removal could be argued as, and rights to due process under the 5th and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution.
So, basic rights.
Basic rights. Courts would likely apply strict scrutiny to any government attempt to forcibly remove individuals from a public space or an entire city without specific individualized legal grounds, like a specific crime being committed, without providing adequate alternative shelter or solutions, and without respecting established legal procedures and due process. There's a history of legal challenges to older vagrancy laws that were often used similarly.
And the federal takeover threat.
A broad federal takeover of D.C.'s governance would also face serious legal challenges, likely focusing on the separation of powers between the executive and legislative branches, since Congress traditionally holds oversight over D.C., and the precise extent of presidential authority over local jurisdictions, even given D.C.'s unique status. It would be a fierce legal battleground over the limits of executive power and individual rights.
So, given all this complexity and controversy, how do the different political viewpoints in the U.S. generally approach this highly visible and sensitive issue of homelessness and urban control? Let's look at the left-leaning perspective again.
From a left-leaning viewpoint, a directive like this would likely be condemned in the strongest terms. It would be seen as inhumane, punitive, counterproductive, and fundamentally failing to address the deep systemic issues that cause homelessness.
What solutions would they emphasize instead?
The emphasis would be squarely on the moral and practical imperative to provide robust social safety nets. That means significantly increasing investment in affordable housing, advocating strongly for Housing First initiatives, expanding access to mental health care and addiction treatment, bolstering community support services, job training programs, and raising the minimum wage. There's a very strong critique from this side of anything that looks like criminalizing poverty or homelessness itself. The focus is on treating it as a public health and socioeconomic crisis that requires compassionate, evidence-based solutions, not police enforcement. Forcibly displacing people is seen as only exacerbating the problem and violating fundamental human dignity.
Okay, now contrasting that, how would a more right-leaning perspective tend to view this type of decisive action demanded by the president?
A right-leaning perspective might be more inclined to support or at least understand the motivation behind such an action. It could be framed as a decisive, necessary measure to restore order, reduce the visible signs of homelessness that can impact tourism or business, and address legitimate concerns about crime and public safety, particularly in the nation's capital.
So the focus is more on order and safety.
Often, yes. This perspective might emphasize individual accountability and the responsibility of government to maintain public spaces, parks, sidewalks, transit areas as safe, clean, and accessible for all citizens and visitors. While not universally supporting forcible removal, there might be arguments for different kinds of interventions.
Such as
Potentially allowing for involuntary commitment for individuals suffering from severe mental illness or substance abuse who are deemed a clear danger to themselves or others. Or stricter enforcement of laws against camping in public areas, public nuisance laws, or panhandling, aiming to discourage visible encampments and maintain a certain standard of public decorum and safety. Some might also frame long-term homelessness encampments as a drain on public resources without leading to productive outcomes for the individuals involved.
It really is a stark contrast, isn't it? One side sees a humanitarian crisis needing systemic solutions and compassion. The other sees a breakdown of public order requiring decisive action and accountability.
It highlights a fundamental philosophical divide in many ways.
Absolutely. And this story, it really forces you, our listener, to think hard about how we as societies choose to deal with incredibly complex social problems like homelessness. What is the right role for government? What are the inviolable rights of the individual, even someone in dire straits? And how do we possibly balance the need for public order and safety with compassionate yet genuinely effective solutions? It's a conversation that really does hit close to home, quite literally, for people in cities everywhere.
A truly fundamental societal question, indeed, with profound implications for how we define community, responsibility, and basic human dignity.
Okay, from the complexities of urban life in the U.S., let's take another jump across the globe. We're looking at a story that speaks volumes about enduring historical legacies and their present-day geopolitical reverberations, even though the specific source material we have is quite succinct on the details. Newspapers are apparently covering a headline that simply reads, "The 13 BN cost of Chagos." Just that.
Right. And even though that headline is brief, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it immediately signals one of the most long-running and poignant disputes stemming directly from the era of decolonization, a story that's still very much active today.
Can you give us the quick background on the Chagos Islands? Some listeners might not be familiar.
Sure. The Chagos dispute centers on the Chagos Archipelago, which is a chain of more than 50 small islands, atolls really, located right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, a deeply controversial decision was made by the United Kingdom, which administered the islands at the time.
What was the decision?
In conjunction with the United States, the UK government forcibly removed, essentially expelled, the entire indigenous population, the Chagosian people, from their homes across the archipelago.
Forcibly remove the whole population? Why?
It was done specifically to clear the way for the establishment of a major United States military base on Diego Garcia, which is the largest island in the Chagos chain.
A military base. And that base is still there today, right? Still strategically important.
Very much so. The joint UK-US military base on Diego Garcia remains a crucial strategic asset. It supports air and naval operations across the Middle East, the Indian Ocean, and the wider Indo-Pacific region. It's played a role in numerous conflicts and power projections.
And the Chagosians, the people who were forced out, what happened to them?
They were essentially exiled, dumped with little support, primarily in Mauritius and the Seychelles, other former British colonies, hundreds, even thousands of miles away. They've been living in poverty and displacement ever since, fighting for decades for two fundamental things: the right to return to their homeland and fair compensation or reparations for what was taken from them.
And there's also a sovereignty dispute over the islands themselves, isn't there?
Yes, complicating matters further. Mauritius, which also gained independence from Britain around the same time, 1968, claims sovereignty over the entire Chagos archipelago. Mauritius argues that the UK illegally detached the Chagos Islands from Mauritian territory just before granting independence, violating international law principles regarding decolonization and the territorial integrity of emerging nations.
Has this gone to international courts?
It has. The dispute has been through various international legal forums, most significantly the International Court of Justice, ICJ, the UN's top court, and the United Nations General Assembly. The rulings from these bodies have generally been in favor of Mauritius's claims, finding that the detachment was unlawful and that the UK should end its administration of the islands as rapidly as possible. Though these rulings are often advisory and lack easy enforcement mechanisms against a major power like the UK.
Okay, so back to the headline, the 30 BN cost of Chagos. What could that massive figure, 30 billion pounds sterling, actually refer to? Is that just financial reparations for the Chagosians, or does it encompass other potential costs?
That 30 billion figure, which has been cited in various reports and discussions around the dispute, likely represents an estimate covering several potentially huge financial and economic considerations. It's probably not just one single thing.
What could be included?
Well, a significant portion could indeed represent an estimate of potential financial reparations owed to the displaced Chagosians and their descendants. This would aim to compensate them for generations of lost homes, livelihoods, cultural heritage, the trauma of forced displacement, and the decades of hardship endured in exile.
That alone could be substantial. What else?
It might also factor in the projected costs associated with facilitating a potential return and resettlement program for the Chagosians, should that ever become politically feasible. Imagine the cost of building necessary infrastructure, housing, utilities, docks, clinics, schools on remote islands to support communities again.
Okay, reparations and resettlement costs. Anything else?
You also have the accumulated legal fees from these decades-long international disputes, which have undoubtedly cost both the UK and Mauritius significant sums in legal resources. And potentially the figure might even attempt to quantify the broader economic implications for the UK if it were to eventually relinquish control of the territory. This could involve the value of the military base, though that's primarily a U.S. asset hosted there, or perhaps potential future economic benefits from the island's exclusive economic zone related to fishing or other resources.
So the 30 billion figure is likely a composite estimate of various historical liabilities and future costs associated with resolving this legacy issue.
Exactly. The sheer size of the figure, whether it's precise or just indicative, highlights the massive scale of the historical injustice and its incredibly protracted consequences, both human and financial, that continue to unfold today.
So this isn't just ancient history. It's a prime ongoing example of how decisions made during the colonial era, often for strategic reasons that seemed paramount at the time, continue to cast very long shadows and generate significant financial, human, and political costs in the 21st century.
Absolutely. It perfectly encapsulates the ongoing global conversation, or often a difficult lack of conversation around decolonization, the complex moral and legal arguments for reparations for historical injustices, and the fundamental right to self-determination for indigenous and displaced peoples.
It's a real knot of history, law, rights, and geopolitics.
A very complex Gordian knot, yes. The Chagos dispute powerfully demonstrates that the past isn't really past. It's a living legacy of colonialism that continues to demand some form of resolution, and it highlights the enduring, often uncomfortable responsibilities of former colonial powers.
So, for you, our listener, this brief headline about a huge sum of money tied to tiny islands serves as a potent illustration. It shows how historical injustices, actions taken decades ago, can accrue massive, long-lasting financial and human costs that continue to shape global politics and international law today. It's a stark reminder that today's news headlines are so often just the latest echoes of yesterday's decisions, carrying very real and sometimes very large price tags.
A powerful and enduring echo indeed, one that continues to resonate very strongly for the people affected.
Okay, let's wrap up our deep dive for today with one final story. This one brings us back to the United Kingdom and impacts a fundamental public service right at the heart of society: healthcare.
Yes, and what's fascinating here again is this practical challenge that governments often face, trying to align the output of the education system with the actual immediate needs of the workforce, especially in absolutely essential sectors like healthcare.
What's the specific issue?
Our sources, including reports from the BBC, detail a new plan that's being put in place in the UK. The goal is to significantly boost job opportunities specifically for newly qualified nurses and midwives.
Okay, boosting jobs for new grads, that sounds positive. What's the catch?
Well, the slightly surprising context is that this move comes directly after there have been explicit warnings of an oversupply of graduates in certain areas of the health service.
Hang on, an oversupply of newly qualified nurses and midwives. Really? I feel like all we ever hear about, especially regarding the National Health Service, the NHS in the UK, is chronic staff shortages. Nurses stretched thin, long waiting lists. How can there possibly be an oversupply oversupply and a shortage at the same time. That sounds like a complete paradox.
It absolutely is a paradox,
Right.
and it really highlights a critical and often incredibly frustrating issue in workforce planning, not just in the UK, but in many countries.
How does this paradox happen?
It happens because the picture is more nuanced than just overall numbers. While there might be significant systemic staff shortages across the NHS as a whole, this reported oversupply of graduates is likely occurring in very specific niches. It could be concentrated in certain specialties within nursing or midwifery, or perhaps in particular geographical regions.
Can you give an example?
Sure, you might, for instance, have a relative surplus of newly graduated general nurses looking for jobs in major desirable urban centers like London or Manchester. But at the same time, there could be a desperate, crippling shortage of nurses willing to work in highly specialized fields. Think intensive care, mental health nursing, maybe community-based care for the elderly, which often require additional training or are seen as more demanding.
Or shortages in less popular locations.
Exactly. While the big cities might have plenty of applicants for entry-level jobs, rural areas or historically underserved regions might consistently struggle to attract and retain enough nursing and midwifery staff. So it boils down to a critical mismatch
A mismatch
between where the newly trained talent is, what their specific initial qualifications are, and where the most pressing needs actually exist within the vast and complex structure of the national healthcare system.
Okay, that makes more sense. So this new plan to boost jobs for the newly qualified, what might that actually involve? Are they just going to wave a magic wand and create thousands of new generic nursing posts? Or are the solutions likely to be more strategic, aimed at fixing that mismatch?
Hopefully the latter. The plan could, and probably should, involve several more strategic solutions designed specifically to address this mismatch between supply and demand.
What kind of strategies?
Well, one obvious and potentially impactful solution would be for the government to provide increased funding specifically earmarked for creating new entry-level nursing and midwifery roles within the NHS, particularly in those areas or specialties currently experiencing shortages, ensuring there are enough suitable positions open for new graduates to actually step into.
So targeted funding for jobs where they're needed most.
Exactly. Another common approach is offering targeted incentives. This could mean financial bonuses, help with housing costs, or maybe programs for accelerated student loan forgiveness for graduates who agree to work in geographically underserved areas or commit to working in high-demand specialties for a certain number of years.
Making the less popular jobs more attractive.
Precisely. We might also see the development or expansion of specific retraining or specialization programs. These could be designed to help new graduates who can't find work in their initial general field to gain the additional skills needed to move into those high-demand specialist areas where the shortages are most acute, like critical care or mental health.
And maybe looking at the training pipeline itself.
That's crucial too. A really comprehensive approach would also involve a careful review of the nursing and midwifery training programs themselves. Are they admitting the right number of students overall? Is that curriculum sufficiently aligned with the future projected needs of the healthcare system? Are they producing graduates with the right mix of skills? It's about trying to optimize that entire pipeline, from education right through to meaningful employment where the need is greatest.
This sounds like it would be very good news for the nursing and midwifery graduates themselves, finally getting a job in the vital field they trained for. But the success or failure of this plan has much broader implications for everyone in the UK, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. A robust, well-staffed, and appropriately skilled healthcare workforce is, without doubt, the fundamental backbone of any effective public health system. It's essential.
And if new graduates can't find jobs?
If newly qualified nurses and midwives, after years of intensive, often expensive education and training, struggle to find suitable employment, it's not just a personal tragedy and a financial burden for those individuals. It also represents a significant, frankly tragic waste of skilled human capital that the country desperately needs.
And it could make future shortages worse.
Yes, because underemployment or unemployment among new graduates can discourage future students from entering the profession, and it ultimately exacerbates the existing staff shortages in the longer run as experienced staff retire.
So ultimately, the quality of care, the accessibility of services, the efficiency of the entire healthcare system that you and your community rely on every day, all of it is directly impacted by how effectively the government manages to plan and manage its healthcare workforce.
It really comes down to getting the right people with the right skills into the right places at the right time. That's the core challenge. Meeting the constantly evolving and often overwhelming health needs of the population depends on getting that workforce planning right.
Yeah.
So this policy decision, while focused on new graduates, really does affect everyone who might ever need healthcare in the UK.
A clear example of how government policy in one area, like workforce planning, directly impacts the quality and accessibility of essential services we all depend on.
Indeed. It's a clear reminder that these policy decisions, even ones that seem quite specific, like job placements for graduates, have incredibly far-reaching societal impacts. They really help determine the overall health of a nation.
Wow. Well, what an incredible journey we have been on today in this deep dive.
We've certainly covered some ground.
We really have. We started with the shifting ecosystems in our oceans, looking at those record warm seas around the UK, and the surprising arrival of new species, a direct, tangible sign of global climate change impacting biodiversity right now. Then we jumped into that high-stakes geopolitical chess game being played out over advanced AI chips, with the U.S. taking a 15% cut of sales to China, revealing those powerful, often unseen forces shaping our technological future and global power dynamics.
A really complex interplay there.
Definitely. Then we had to delve into the harrowing realities of journalism in conflict zones, discussing the tragic deaths of journalists in Gaza, the battle for truth amidst conflicting narratives, and the broader context of Israel's ongoing campaign and the immense human calamity unfolding there.
A deeply sobering discussion.
It was. Then we transitioned back to significant domestic challenges right here in the United States, exploring that complex, difficult issue of homelessness in Washington, D.C., President Trump's controversial directives demanding people immediately move out, and the starkly contrasting political perspectives on how society should address such deep social problems.
Highlighting those fundamental divides.
Absolutely. And from there, we touched on the long tail of history, looking at the enduring financial and human cost of colonial legacies through the lens of the 30 billion cost of Chago's headline.
A reminder the past is never truly past.
Exactly. And we finished up by examining a critical policy challenge right now in the United Kingdom, the paradox of needing healthcare workers while also having an oversupply of graduates in some areas, and the plans to try and boost jobs for nurses and midwives where they're needed most.
Connecting education to workforce needs.
So after covering all that, what does this all mean when you put these pieces together?
I think what it means is that our world is just an incredibly complex, deeply interconnected place. And maybe every piece of news, no matter how distant or disparate it might seem on the surface, warm seas, AI chips, war reporting, homelessness, colonial legacies, healthcare jobs, each one is actually a vital thread in this larger global tapestry.
They're all linked somehow.
They are, often by these unseen forces, these ripple effects that connect economics, environment, politics, technology, and human lives across borders and across sectors.
Yeah.
Consider just for a moment how all these stories we discussed today intersect in some way.
How so?
Well, think about how the technology driving AI, like those chips, could be used to better model climate change, affecting those ocean temperatures, but also has implications for surveillance and control, relevant in both conflict zones and discussions about urban order. Think about how historical legacies, like Chago's, continue to shape geopolitical relationships that influence current conflicts and economic policies. Think about how a nation's ability to care for its citizens through healthcare workforce planning reflects its priorities and economic health, which are themselves affected by global trends. It's all woven together.
That's a powerful way to think about it.
And understanding these dynamics, seeing these connections, it doesn't just make you, our listener, more well-informed in a trivia sense. It genuinely shapes your perspective. It helps you understand your own place, your own informed role within this constantly evolving global landscape.
So the goal is to keep connecting the dots.
Always. There's always more to learn, always more connections to make, and maybe seeing these links is the crucial first step. Perhaps the next time you encounter a headline, maybe you'll pause for just a second longer and ask yourself, what are the hidden currents really at play here? How might this seemingly isolated event be connected to those broader forces shaping our shared world?
A fantastic thought to end on. And that, our friends, is exactly why we do the deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us for this in-depth discussion today.
Thank you for listening.
Until next time, keep digging.